a 4-lane highway where everybody was gridlocked and backed up. They turned that same highway, didn't expand it any, but made the lines smaller to make it 6 lanes. So it's the same amount of space, but just more lanes in the same amount of space by painting additional lines. Alright, what's going on, you guys? Welcome back to Renaissance Life TV, where we take life to a whole new level. If you're watching this video, this is part 2 of why I chose to make the move away from a big city to move to a smaller city. So if you haven't checked out part 1, go ahead and go back and watch part 1 because you don't want to miss what was said in part 1. There are a lot of great tips and a lot of detailed reasons as to why I made the move are actually in part 1 of the video. But I'm glad you're here, and let's get right into it. Okay, so the next reason why I chose to move from a larger city to a smaller city was because the people tend to be nicer. So when I was also looking for the area to move to, I considered what the people are like in that area. So in a large city, there's a tendency for people to be a little bit more cutthroat, a little bit less friendly. It tends to be more fast-paced, and that tends to breed an environment where people are not as interested in being kind to other people, in particular people that they don't know, right? So don't get me wrong, we had a lot of great friends. There were a lot of nice people that we met. All of our family, both of our families, still live in that city. But on a whole, when you look at the environment, it's kind of like, you can name particular states and cities, large cities like New York. You know what the people are like in New York. New Jersey, you know what the people are like in New Jersey. Miami, you know what the people are like as a whole in general, right? So, hate to generalize. I don't like to live in generalities, but in general, there tends to be a tone, right? There tends to be sort of a feel for a city and the people who live there in general. Do they tend to be friendly? Are they more standoffish? Are they more cliquey? So there's a lot of that goes into where you choose to live as well. So in my particular city, the people tend to be nicer as a whole, right? So people still say good morning. People say sir and ma'am and things like that. So it's not a super country area, but there's more respect in general for people. Another part about it is the smaller city tends to be slower paced. So when things are slower paced, things go a little bit easier, right? It's kind of like being in the Caribbean. Things are so slow, it's just relaxed, man. It's chill. So people are just chill. They just enjoy spending time with other people. They're nicer in general because it's less stressful. When things are slower pace, they're less stressful. So that's another big reason, a huge reason for moving from a super big city to a smaller city is less stress. In the big city, everything was so fast paced, everything was congested, there was so much traffic. I mean, I kid you not, I used to commute 2 hours to and from work each day. So that's 4 hours total, just in transit to and from work each day. I mean, you're losing so much time fighting traffic. And so I used to drive 15 to 20 minutes to the train station, take the train for an hour. It would drop me off at a bus terminal where all the employees going to the downtown area who worked in downtown took a particular express bus that took express lanes to downtown for another hour to get to downtown and be able to go to work. Now, the fact that there are even express lanes tells you a lot, right? So the infrastructure, the expressway that's supposed to be express was anything but express. So from 5 in the morning, probably till 9 a.m., that's rush hour traffic, and you're gridlocked. I mean, you're bumper to bumper. You're spending hours just trying to get to your destination, just trying to get to work, and everybody's going in the same direction. So what they did was a 4-lane highway where everybody was gridlocked and backed up. They turned that same highway, didn't expand it any, but made the lines smaller to make it 6 lanes. So it's the same amount of space, but just more lanes in the same amount of space by painting additional lines. And so the 2 additional lanes that they created, they make those lanes toll lanes. So you pay a fee, you're paying money to be able to go on those express lanes so that way you can get to your destination more quickly. Unfortunately, as you probably imagined, it's so congested in this city that even though these lanes are express lanes, typically they're of no use and they're going as slow and even sometimes slower than the regular lanes. So it's just the problem of having too many people, over congested, oversaturated, not enough infrastructure. You can't build the infrastructure quickly enough to keep up with just the sheer amount of people that are going there. So as you might imagine, all of this leads to a lot more stress. People tend to be a lot more on edge, snappier, and it really does impact your standard of living. So I'm going to take a pause here and just focus for a few seconds on your standard of living. Don't underestimate the importance of your standard of living. I think so many times that's one of the things that people really underestimate and don't even think about when they move somewhere, right? Or when they live somewhere. The most typical considerations are, how much money can I make? Are the amenities that are particularly important to me there? And that's really where most people stop, right? But they don't really think about the standard of living. In my mind, if you make 6 figures where you live, and let's say the thing that's most important to you is nightlife, and you have nightlife, but all of the other things that actually impact your standard of living, right? So you're super stressed, you spend hours in commute to and from work, your cost of living is really high, and all those things are just in disarray. In general, you're not really going to be that happy. So you have all the things that you think would make you happy, but in general, because your standard of living, which is taking all these things as a whole, a more holistic approach, is just in disarray, you're really not going to be happy at the end of the day. So I put my standard of living above probably everything else. What is your standard of life? What is your quality of life? What is the quality of life that you're enjoying where you live? Think about that, because when I'm old and none of these things really matter anymore, am I really going to look back on my life and be like, you know, it was all worth it because I spent those 10 years making 90 grand? That's probably not what I'm going to think about. When you get to that stage, what you're thinking about are the things that really matter. Did you really have the ability to enjoy time with your family? Were you stressed your entire life? Did your stress lead to illness? How much time in your life did you spend, wasting commuting, or, in the grind, in the hustle, fighting for a dollar, working so hard for a dollar where you couldn't really even enjoy it at the end of the day? So let me know what you think about that in the comments. But I really think that's really an underestimated aspect of where you choose to live, is what is your standard of living going to be when you're there, and what is your quality of life where you are? And if it's not good, is there somewhere where you could be where your quality of life would be better? Maybe that does mean moving to an actual small town somewhere. So yeah, maybe you don't make as much money, but maybe things don't cost as much, and maybe your quality of life is actually better. You'll live longer, be healthier, and be happier. Now, here's another thing I'd say here is, I'm not advocating that everybody just get up and leave a city, or just move, or if you're in a big city, that's not where you should be or anything like that. That's not what I'm advocating. And one thing I also want to make clear is that not everybody has the opportunity or the ability to make a move. So some people are stuck out of circumstances outside of themselves. I can think of a couple off the top of my head. For instance, you may have older parents and maybe they're sick and they're in that city and you need to stay there and you need to take care of them. So that is a possibility, Along those lines, maybe it's a possibility to move and bring those parents with you to a better situation. So that's also a possibility. I've also seen the scenario where 2 people were married and for whatever reason they got divorced at some point. And so the other partner lives in a particular city where you both lived and you can't leave that city because you share time with the child, right? So there's some limitations there as to whether you can move. So I understand that not every situation allows for you to just up and leave. I'm also not advocating for you to just up and leave without really considering what your options are, what the realities of your situation are. But I think a lot of people can say that that is the situation for them and they would actually be better off in a different place. But for fear of moving or keeping up with the Joneses or what other people will think if they move, they just don't do it, right? So hopefully that's not you. And if that's you, then maybe this is something that will help you consider taking that leap of faith and doing what's best for you in your particular situation and circumstance. Okay, the last reason why I moved from a big city to a smaller city is that in my case, the smaller city is more family oriented. So this has a lot to do with some of the other things that I already mentioned. You know, the people being nicer, less stressful environment, all those sorts of things also make it more conducive for families. And a lot of times these smaller cities are very intentional about attracting families, attracting young families, in fact, is the motive for a lot of cities. So for me, what that means is in my particular city, they constantly have events and things going on that are family friendly, kid friendly, or just things for people in general, right? So things for guys, things for women. They have festivals in the fall, tons of festivals that you can go to. There's always parades of different types. There are carnivals, and a lot of this stuff is free. It's put on by the city itself. You know, a lot of times in bigger cities, the appeal, the draw, the motive of the city is to attract a lot of time single people, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. But if you're a family person, and if you have a family and you have a young family, you want to live in a place that is actually tailoring their services, tailoring their activities to your demographic. When I lived in a big city, we were able to find things to do, but of course it's a little bit more difficult, right? To find things that are family friendly, more conducive, but you can find it. And you know, part of that means joining groups, going on Meetup and seeing things that are happening in your community, attaching yourself to different boards, and also just creating your own community. So that's going to be something you're going to want to do wherever you go. Okay, now here's the real side, and I would say some of the cons of moving from a bigger city to a smaller city. So number one, up front, the first thing that probably comes to mind is the amenities. So one of the things that we miss about the big city is being able to get different types of food, and the quality of food sometimes is different. So if you like Chinese food, for instance, the Chinese food in a big city oftentimes would be many times better than the Chinese food in a smaller city. A lot of that is lack of competition, right? So when you have competition, better restaurants beat out the restaurants that are not that good. And the restaurants that are not that good don't stay around as long because people have other options. If you don't provide good service or you don't provide good food, they're going to go to another restaurant because they have options. That really does force people to really try to put out a better product sometimes, at least in terms of food, because restaurants are a dime a dozen. So if you don't put out a good product, people are going to go somewhere else, right? People are fickle. There's not that same sort of loyalty like this is the only restaurant in my town, so I'm really going to support it. No, they'll go down the block and go to another Chinese restaurant 2 blocks away because they have options. Even for the larger chains, nobody's going to be stuck going to the 1 or 2 Burger Kings in town. There's like 100 Burger Kings, so they can just go to a different Burger King. And if you don't do well, you're just not going to get that much business. So that's definitely something that we miss. Now, having said that, be resourceful, go around, try different things. So one of the things we do, we have our go-tos. And we're always trying new things because it's really hard to go to every restaurant in a city, even in a smaller city. Maybe in a small town it's possible, but even in a smaller city, there are a lot of restaurants. So we find our favorites. So we have some favorites, and there's always going to be good food everywhere. You should be able to find something that you like or something that is good. And then there are those that we're like, yeah, we're not going there. Sometimes they even have great reviews and we're like, how did people even say this? And of course, tastes are different, so that also plays a factor in it as well. But the amenities are certainly something that you could say is a con. Of course, being in a larger market, you have more of the arts, you have larger everything. So being in a smaller city means oftentimes you have a smaller airport, which can also increase the price of airfare. Less people going into that airport, the airline charges more per ticket. Once again, you've got to be resourceful there, plan in advance, find out how to get the cheaper tickets. And sometimes that means driving a little bit further to an adjoining city to be able to get cheaper airfare at a larger airport. So that's something you want to consider too. Is there a city nearby the city that you want to move to that even if you don't want to go out of the airport where you live, you can drive an hour, hour and a half and be at the next city, which is a larger city, and be able to get cheaper airfare and fly out of there instead. So another thing to consider moving away from a bigger city that is somewhat of a con is that there is an adjustment period, right? So I don't want you to think you move from a big city to a smaller city and it's just like peaches and roses and everything's beautiful. There are a lot of great things that will happen, but there is an adjustment period, right? So finding new friends, building up a new community. If you don't already have friends there, you're going to have to meet new people. You're going to have to build your own village, your own community from scratch. So that takes time, right? And that can be an adjustment period. That can be challenging and that can be difficult. So it's really important to have some sort of support structure and try to plug in as quickly as possible, sooner rather than later, because that also helps with depression, right? So moving to a new city, especially by yourself, depression, even as a couple, as a family, any change in your environment can cause, bouts of lowered mood, right? So a lot of times we talk about depression and, we think feeling bad and feeling down means you're depressed. And yes, it could be, but it doesn't become clinical. Depression doesn't until it's extended for a period of time beyond, I think it's like 2 months, where you stay at that period. That's when it would be clinical depression. But we all go through moods, right? We all go through depressive states and depressive times. So that can happen in a move. So be prepared for it. Have a game plan. Stay connected to your community back where you came from. Another part of the adjustment is just adjusting to the pace. So if you're used to a faster pace, you will probably have to make some adjustment to a slower paced environment. So one of the things that we had to adjust to where we came from, we were used to things being open, restaurants being open, stores being open at 11 p.m., at midnight, some things being open 24 hours, and not closing, right? Being able to go to the movies super late. In a smaller town, things tend to close earlier. So a lot of times the restaurants close the latest 10 p.m. unless it's like fast food, like your national chains. They might close a little bit later, maybe like 11, maybe midnight. But if you're talking about your typical restaurants, a lot of them close at 9, 10 p.m. So that means you've got to plan ahead. So if you know you want to get dinner at a particular restaurant, know when it closes, and maybe you want to plan to get your dinner earlier, because if you get hungry at 10 at night and you want to go out and get something to eat at a restaurant, it'll probably be closed. Now, you could probably go to a fast food place like McDonald's or Burger King or Wendy's or something like that. But if you actually want like food from a restaurant, you're going to have to try to get it earlier than later. Just taking it for what it is and going with the flow. So if things are a little bit slower, you take it for what it is. If you're not worried about comparing, you really will enjoy it for what it is. So that's all I have for why I moved from a big city to a smaller city and everything that went into my consideration for why I made the move with my family and why it worked for us in particular. So really look at your particular situation and then make the decision based on that in consultation with your loved ones and whoever you consult with. So I hope this gave you some things to think about if you're thinking about moving from a big city to a smaller city or vice versa. Some things that you can kind of consider and maybe some things you never thought about. If you have any thoughts, please leave it in the comments section below. If you have any questions, please leave it in the comments section below. I do respond to every comment. Please go ahead and like and subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. It just takes a second and it really does help this channel grow. And I will see you next time on Renaissance Life TV. Cheers.